What's going on, guys? So this is going to be the weekly scam from December 9th to December 13th, and I'm going to be going over all of the charts that I'll be looking at through the week. Obviously this week's a little bit difficult to trade just because we have a lot. I'm not a big crypto guy, first of all. We are getting a slight little Bitcoin sell, but basically all just flat throughout that whole um, weekend, right? So I'm not going to really be focusing too much Bitcoin. I never do, and I probably never will. There's a couple minor names that are clean looking, and I might dabble into those as we go on through the week if they look really clean. But aside from that, I won't be focusing Bitcoin. We go over into DraftKings. This was the big change of hands on the weekly chart that we've been talking about. This is a name in ARKK as well. We've seen a very clear theme with ARKK. Uh, Obviously, this is partially just due to Tesla and basically what Tesla's been doing. And Tesla had a beautiful close and then a new monthly open and a really nice strong move. So that has been the market leader, and the name that has emerged as a new theme. Obviously, we have some other names as sympathies to that, just like Rivian. Rivian's a really nice looking chart. I could add this one to the focus for a side watch just because I really like the sympathy trade to Tesla. This is basically just one of those charts where you're getting the lower low accumulation potential when you zoom out and you look at this all the way back at $19 in May of 2022. And this was a big time weekly hammer bar on a lot of volume, and then it led to new lower lows on multi-week bases. We obviously got really big volume pops throughout this whole entire range, and as we popped and dropped, these have just been consolidated lows, and now we're creeping back above that preliminary accumulation level that's sitting here. And then if you go into the smaller time frames, that kind of ties in with where that high tight flag was at on the daily chart before we saw a continuation higher. So I do like this chart. That's also tying in with this big time gap up that we had as a 23, actually even more than a 23% gap up that we had on May, and there's a lot of volume behind that. So I would say that basically what was happening here is they were initially accumulating and then they resold, and now they're just looking for the accumulation to finish through absorbing the dips that were bought back up from this whole entire base that was happening throughout October into November. We obviously had some sort of huge pop that was into November 13th, and then we dropped right back into that support, and then from that support we just started basically creating another little leg of accumulation happening. So what I would like to see for this chart would just be absorbing this weekly wick. It's not the prettiest looking weekly candle, but you guys also have to dissect price action and be able to look and see where a lot of the volume poured in at. And a lot of it was on this candle. We had a lot of consolidation off of that candle and continuation up into the high of that candle. This is also, like I said, from a weekly perspective, just one big weekly level with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks of consolidation before we drop back beneath. So I'd like to see how this one behaves around that $13 level, and that's going to be the first focus on my watch list. But the name has already seen nice continuation off of 1168 up into 13, and I don't like taking jack premiums of any sort. So yeah, the next name that's going to be on the focus list is going to be AMD. The reasoning as to why I like AMD is just where SMH is at. This is being a major underperformer. We obviously have leaders emerging as in ARKK. We also have IWM on the potential as a new leader in the market. But one thing that I will have to say is that SMH is basically at a very pivotal spot on the daily chart. So I would like to see if this would line up with agreement to AMD. If AMD wants to agree with this pop over this daily resistance, which is also this gap, right? This is also sitting right off of where a gap is. And these are buyers claiming these gaps and then potentially rebidding off of the top of the gap. We already had the follow through with AVGO. We have AVGO earnings, and then 2 weeks from now we have MU earnings, I believe. So things could chop around just a little bit. There isn't going to be anything that's too much of my focus as far as chip sector goes, but with the continuation that we had on Friday on AVGO, which is basically an undercut of this daily pivot, followed by a reclaim, and then a pop above this gap, and then followed by the pop above that gap. We claimed above it and then rebid on top of it. I would like to see some follow through that's happening over potentially with AMD. We don't have a clean bullish weekly chart really to deal with here, but the range is really tightening as we have basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks of compression that are sitting off of basically where a higher low needs to be decided before we crack structure. So I want to see how this one behaves. I want to see if we could actually crack beneath 132.83, and I'll honestly be looking for some shorts to then go sweep the lows down here at the August 5th bar. But this is also one big previous breakout level retest. And then we have a lot of resistance on the weekly chart that's sitting here basically from these 3 weeks of consolidation. When you go into the daily chart, this is more or less just basically a pop, consolidation, drop, new lower low. The lower low is actually bought up, and then the volume kind of dried out, and then we just started to trade within this range. One thing that I would like to see is just basically the tape really start to gain a little bit of strength and momentum as we lead into basically just a new week. And like I said, from the weekly chart perspective, this would likely need to hold a higher low in this range, and it could get really explosive to the upside in a very quick amount of time. And sometimes you'll get a quick little trap beneath the trend line, and I'm not a big like trend line short kind of guy, but this would technically crack structure beneath 133, which would not be a very good look. So we did get some bearish news actually to lead off into the end of the day, and a lot of volume actually poured in at the lows with a very neutral 15-minute bar. And if you go to the hourly chart, you have a little bit of a wick off of that candle. So I don't know if they're going to accumulate that sort of news, but that's just going to be a side watch for me as we go through the week. We actually do have a gap fill all the way up in 166 that starts at 153. 153 would likely be the profit target one if this was a further dated swing, and I saw something that really led me to believe that this is going to just see a slight recorrection. And I'm not saying that this thing is going to be some sort of new leader of some sort. It's a name that has been in a clear distribution ever since January OPEX leading into March. And then we had the big liquidation from the highs, and then we just had subsequently, we had some lower highs on the weekly chart. But the range is really compressing at a spot that's basically make or break on the chart. So that will be my focus. I really do like Z scalar. So with this chart, guys, it's basically just one big path of least resistance into an SOS on this weekly level. When you look at this from the weekly perspective, guys, basically all this really is some sort of reaccumulation at where this discounted higher low potential could potentially be at. We basically just tested down into the golden pocket, and now we're looking for the sign of strength with a lot of volume on that weekly candle. And if you see where the volume basically poured in at, it was off of this gap. It popped down, and then it recovered back up into the top of the range and actually closed the week off above that gap level. That's basically this earnings area, right? So we have the earnings out of the way. If you go take a look at the daily and the weekly, everything looks really clean here. We have a little resistance break basically at 216, but I would more and less just really like to see some sort of pullback that can hold the earnings gap. This is basically your earnings gap from here to here. So if we could get some sort of pullback, and if you go into the 15 or into your hourly chart, I'm basically just looking for this thing to staircase its way higher. We have a resistance in some of these trading session highs to start monitoring, or if this does get a gap up and a strong move on that orb, followed by a slight little pullback, I probably will take some shorter dated options just because I think we will get follow through off of how this weekly print looks with a lot of volume, a red to green weekly print. It's also on top of a resistance that has been here since basically the middle of summer, right? So I really do like this chart, and I would probably rather play time rather than try to front run some sort of continuation that can be highly unlikely and pretty dangerous with short dated options. But Z-Scalar is going to be on my focus for some sort of continuation. There's really not much to this chart, other than that, we do have some volatility over in UNH. I've been looking at this one, and it's into one big retest, although the CEO got shot and killed, right? So I don't know if this is going to be some sort of pullback trade where we get some sort of like a sweep beneath this low. This is also, like I said, just into one massive big old retest on the weekly chart. I don't think this candle looks good at all, and I really don't want to play long on this bar. But if we do formulate some sort of structure where we're getting a lot of volume or exhaustion volume from those lows, I think this could be an opportunity for some sort of relief trade. So this will likely be on the focus list. Like I said, very speculative idea, not anything that I want to put too much of my time or effort into basically analyzing where this thing will go. Very, very, very unfortunate thing that happened here. So I don't really know what's going to happen. Let's just dive into DraftKings now. This is a swing that I have, and I bought the dip on the sweep of all of this liquidity that was on these 3 days of support at 42.72. If you're an EMA guy, it's basically just a tap of the 21, but that's also basically just one big retest off of 42.31, right? So we had a big headline that actually came out, and which I was expecting of. If you go into the daily chart, the reasoning as to why I knew this headline was here was just essentially how we were taking out all of this resistance and pushing up into these upper extremes of the previous distribution phase. And we didn't have any volume. There was no volume, there was no candles, there was no trading activity going on up here. So that basically can let you conclude that there is something brewing as far as there's not enough liquidity within this general range, so you would have to push out and stop people out to get their hands on more liquidity to be able to push the name higher if they would like to do so. And I feel like that could be potentially off of this wick with this crazy hourly volume of 3.81 million. And if you guys zoom out and look at the perspective of how big this volume is, it's the biggest hourly volume that we've actually had since the opening print basically on that earnings day, right? So huge volume on the earnings day and technically pretty bullish. We basically covered the spread of that entirety of that candle. We came back down, filled the gap, got a pop back above now. So I'm basically just looking at for this range to be some sort of wick to be defended off of. I do have a swing here. Like I said, this is also an ARKK name, and I feel like they're digesting everything properly in a very constructive, healthy way for this to continue to the upside off of this candle and its wick, as well as a sweep of all of this liquidity on this 3-day support, as well as a retest here, a tap into the 21. And I feel like volatility can really pick up here, just given the fact that we have a pretty neutral spread candle and a resistance on increased volume with really big hourly stopping volume off of this wick at lows. And if you go into the 15 guys or into your 5-minute, you could basically see how a lot of the volume actually came in at the lows, right? And it likely poured in as a dip buy throughout this bar and towards the lows of that candle. So if we were to get some sort of rest day, or some sort of gap up and maybe a push back up into the resistance and then a cool off, you could start looking for an entry from this low to the current high on that new week opening high. And then start looking for a discounted pullback if they allow one to happen. And if not, it's cool, it's whatever. But yeah, this will be a focus of me, and I could trade some shorter dated trade here. There's really nothing too much to this trade, so we'll move on to Google. Google is one of these names where we have the seasonal flows, we have everything, we have all of the volatility on the table to be able to take advantage of this one coming out of this reaccumulation upper range retest that happened, and it had some slippage beneath. But if you go into the daily chart, guys, this was basically just one big fake out off of news, and this is kind of like your same concept with just how volume kind of poured in as we consolidated throughout this trading session, and then you get another flat trading session on low volume followed by continuation to the upside. This was a really nice short opportunity that we had off of what this orb failure brought us last week, which is a fill of the gap, right? So that's a big resistance that we would likely need to soak. And then we have a huge gap here that just needs to be defended off of. Basically, what needs to happen here is we can breach above 176, or we could just digest this upper range and then start thinking about cracking structure, meaning taking out these previous lower highs, turning them into higher lows, and basically just pushing above, retesting, finding some sort of retest and trading it back to the upper extremes of the range. Microsoft, really, really clean, successful weekly close that we have here. I really do like this chart and basically how this has just formulated so many weeks of consolidation. So this is going to be one that is going to be on my focus list. There's not really too much to talk about with this chart other than seeing really nice rest basically above this resistance. We do have a slight gap that was filled up into 445, and then we have another gap that was actually never filled, which caught my eye all the way up into 449.52. So I feel like if we could pull back, find some sort of discounted entry and some rest within this really healthy looking weekly spread, then I would be looking for a trade opportunity to the upside. If that weren't to happen and it didn't happen as easy as that, then I'd be just looking for the gap to fill, these little gaps to fill within this trend. That's basically also just sitting right off of this huge earnings gap down, which I think they fully absorbed, right? This is your earnings gap technically, where they pushed it down, they took out these supports, and then they obviously reclaimed the bottom of the earnings gap, pulled it back towards that earnings gap territory from the bottom of the range, and then they started to find the full soak of the earnings gap. And then that led to, like I said, just a really nice follow through and continuation from the weekly perspective. And then we have an all-time high sitting all the way up at 468. So I wouldn't hold any strong bias on this one just to start off the week, but I would like to see the behavior and what's going on here. And yeah, I think this one can start trading really well given the fact that we have a lot of volatility. We have a lot of momentum picking up above this huge weekly resistance that has been here since basically the middle of September. So yeah, now we'll go into BA. BA is a really nice chart in my opinion, just given the fact that we have massive weekly volume anomalies sitting in the October 28th bar, and then we bled into a new lower low. That lower low was purchased up, and now we're basically just digesting on the daily chart off of where this gap was sitting, which is this tiny little gap that you could see from down here and up here, right? So basically what needs to happen, guys, is this needs to form some sort of high tight consolidation, and maybe we could take a break in base over 160, or maybe we could catch some sort of entry off of these EMAs and start looking for some sort of higher low. We do have a tiny little gap that's down into 149.29, but I would just like to see how this one trades in this upper range, given the fact that we have a lot of consolidation throughout this whole area. These were all areas of where sellers were showing their hand as being exhausted, followed by pops, followed by more accumulation into a drop. That was the shakeout, in my opinion. So if we can catch a discounted higher low, basically on your fibs, which is towards that gap fill, that would be the most optimal entry, although I don't think, given the fact that we have a shakeout already in mind, that we already have some crazy weekly volume anomalies, I would rather just take a safe trade above 160 or above 162.50 to then go target up into the highs of that gap that's sitting up here at 169.60 up into 173.74. So we'll see what goes on with this one. Not anything too crazy over there. And we also need to talk about what was the other one that I had? LMT. Okay, so LMT is a speculative name in case the equity market bleeds a little bit, in case we get a headline. And the only reason I say that is because you guys know how financial markets and how big retests and how charts can sometimes align with how things come out. We had some ugly looking weekly candles from the upper range, right? And this was basically one of those trades where it's kind of like your parabolic short setup. This was actually into the earnings report where it didn't get a big move throughout the actual report, but into the trading session they unloaded so much inventory up here, and then they you find a pop. That pop leads into a lower high, and then you drop a little bit further down. You had a big gap down and a big gross day for LMT that was sitting on this day. Basically, decent volume, pretty high volume on that candle. You have a slight little wick there, and then it seems now like progress is stalling from a seller perspective as you get beneath that low. And if you go into the 15, you actually had a really nice strong close and nice consolidation into that close as well. we could get Trump talking about these that would basically help these names and propel these names. And it's also just into one big weekly level retest. So if we could get down into the 500 psych, I would be really eyeing this thing up, really eyeing up a bid entering in, and we can take it from there. But if not, it's whatever. We could go into its other guy, RTX. So RTX is in a massive weekly support as well. Basically what I'd be looking for here on RTX is just for this thing to basically break beneath this daily slash weekly support and then find some sort of sweep or shakeout off of the support. If we can break beneath and then obviously catch some sort of reclaim back above and find a higher low, I think I could trade this thing back to the upside. Obviously, market conditions would need to favor that, and as of right now, that's just fully speculative and we need only time will tell with that. But as far as this name goes, I feel like with all of the coiled action happening on the weekly chart up here at 160 or 117.35, it could be a really nice opportunity for the upside, especially, like I said, if we get a failure to break and base beneath that. And if that could happen, it could be a really good trade. So that's going to wrap up the weekly scan. There isn't really much to talk about this week, and that's why I've been pretty quiet. I'm going to be looking probably at some sort of smaller time frame intraday trade on NVIDIA, given the fact that on the daily chart we're back testing this previous weekly area. We filled this gap down here and swept out that 132 low. And this has been holding higher low structure from the weekly chart perspective ever since this candle. And then obviously we showed our hand with this wick on this weekly bar. And that's also pressing up right against a very critical weekly level at 140.76. And if you go into the daily chart, guys, this is basically just one huge battle over this level here around 140, right? So we did have a big wick and a big failure from the upper end of this candle that swept out all of these days of resistance and compression, and then it led to a little bit of a drawdown down into that 132 area. It took out the 132 area, and then we saw some upsides. So I want to see what could happen here. If you're an EMA guy, it's basically sitting right off of the 9 and 21, which is also pretty interesting to me. So this could be a gap and go trade into tomorrow morning. But like I said, with all of these setups, only time will tell. So, yep, that will be it for the list. And things will obviously update as I move further into the week.